No, that's not right. Kindergarten through fifth grade. Sorry about that. I was thinking about my microphone and didn't get a wide enough span there. So, last week we had a pretty heavy lesson, really, and I appreciate the comments from that. And if you weren't here last week, or if you didn't catch it, I think it went out on YouTube or on Facebook, and a few got to watch it that way. And I think they're working on getting each lesson on there every week that way, so you can kind of be watching for that if you don't get to be here and you want to experience that with us. Why there would be a chance to do that. And so I appreciate all the work that goes into everything with the sound and the video and all of that to make those kind of things happen. But last week was fairly heavy in some ways. We looked at a story that is a very difficult one, even just to sit down and read from the Scripture. It ends out Judges. It has to do with murder. It has to do with people being treated in just completely uncivilized ways. I mean, just treating one another with contempt, with revenge in some cases. It has to do with a tribe nearly wiped out in Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, and the way that they reimbursed that, if you will, that just totally disregarded women. There's all kinds of things in this that we looked at last week, and we looked at the fact that in those days, and it really ends up Judges at a point you would think, okay, at least the book would end up and he would leave it on a good note, but it's not at all. It ends the way that we ended last week. And we see scattered through there, and we started out by looking at the fact that everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. That people were doing what they wanted to do at a point of time when they wanted to do it, and they weren't considering other people. They were doing what they thought was best. And in some of those cases, we could see, after we kind of broke that down, looked at it a little more carefully, that they really could have thought that was best, even though obviously it wasn't. When you back up and you look at the whole thing, you see everything that took place. It wasn't best. But how that they could have reasoned that with what had happened within their days, within the time that they were living. But we still ask ourselves the question, how could it get that bad? Is that what it says on the back of the bulletin? Okay, how could it get that bad? What in the world would bring a culture, a society, to that point that they could do the things that these people did? And I don't want to go back over all of those things. I mean, some of those things are horrible just to even think about. And we see things happen today that are horrible to think about, horrible to try to imagine, and we don't really want to imagine that. But this was so detailed of a story that was given to us. I mean, hopefully we've looked at why it's there, because it has something to teach us about doing what we want to do, when we want to do it, and whoever we want to do it with, and all of that. That we can see where that leads. We can see what that causes even within our own lives. Hopefully we see the reason it's there. But still this question that comes, how in the world could it get that bad? Well, I want to start in the first part, and I just want to go through this with you a little bit, and there really is no lesson plan to this. It's just simply what God is saying throughout this as we come to a time. He's led these people, and I'm going back to the last part of Joshua, and we're getting ready then to start Judges, but we're just going to glance at a few of these and kind of talk about a few of these, because it's what God is unfolding of what is happening to his people and what he says was going to happen. And hopefully by looking at this, we can see this is how it can get that bad. These were God's people that he had brought out of Egypt. They had grown to be a people under slavery. He had brought them out of Egypt. He had delivered them in the wilderness, although there were those, of course, those who were adults that came out that complained, those who were not satisfied with what God was doing for them, and even to a point that he basically brought a curse upon them that they would die in the wilderness. But we have those that are 20 and younger growing up and then able to enter into the land of Canaan after these 40 years. And of course, Joshua and Caleb with them. The only two. They enter into the land of Canaan, and there's Joshua being a leader, and that's where we're going to be reading, only we're fast-forwarding to the end of his life. But they go into the land of Canaan, into the land of these other nations, if you will, of people that are living there. And God leads the way. But they have to yield unto his leading. And it's a bumpy road. It's not just, okay, we're just going to go in and take care of everything. But God gives them some instructions, and they don't follow all those instructions. They follow some of those instructions, but they don't completely wipe the people out. They don't completely drive everybody out of the land. We find that they leave some there. And Joshua is even involved in some of this happening. But toward the end of Joshua's life, and this is in chapter 24 of Joshua, Joshua brought all the people together, and he begins telling them this story about God delivering them, and they know the story very well. But he says, starting in verse 11, I want to start there, in Joshua 24, he says, "Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also the 2 Amorite kings, you did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." How many people have that up in their house somewhere? Okay. That's one of those favorite verses, right? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This is Joshua talking. He's saying, you choose who you're going to serve. Put away all the false gods. Get rid of all those that you served on the other side of the Euphrates. Get rid of all the gods of the people of this land that we've entered into. Get rid of all of that, and you serve God. But you choose to serve God. You make a choice. And when you make that choice, you stick to it. If it's too burdensome for you to serve God, then don't serve him. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve him. He's giving a choice. God is giving a choice. Then the people, verse 16, answered, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt, from that land of slavery, and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord, because he is our God." These people know what's going on. They know what God has done for them. They're describing what God has done for them. Far be it from us to serve any other God. This is what God has done for us, and we too will serve the Lord. Joshua said to the people, verse 19, "You're not able. You're not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He's a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you." But the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Anybody ever do this with one of their kids? I've seen a few of you smile right away. No, that's what we want to do. No, it's really not. You won't do it. When it comes down to it, you won't do it. Yes, we will. Daddy, we want the puppy. No, I know better, because when we get the puppy, you'll take care of it for a week. It may be if it lasts a week. And then after a week, who's going to have to feed the puppy? Mom. Yeah, not Dad, Mom. No, we will. We'll take care of it. We'll do everything. We'll take care of the puppy. No, you won't. You won't be able to. Yeah, we will. Absolutely sure that they will. And you know better. They're not going to. Does that sound like what Joshua was doing? I mean, it sounds very familiar to me. The people said, no, but we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. You're witnesses against yourselves. So much for positive thinking, right? You are witnesses against yourselves. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you, and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him. On that day Joshua made a covenant for the people. And there at Shechem he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws, and Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak, near the holy place of the Lord. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. Then Joshua dismissed the people, each to their own inheritance. Joshua died. We do find out that during the days of Joshua and even of the elders that outlived him in verse 31, that these people were faithful to the Lord. As you go in, and I know I've mentioned this before, but as you go into Judges and they begin inquiring of the Lord, God, who do you want us to go up first? Which tribe do you want to go first to fight these Canaanites? Because they're not done with all of this. They're still trying to get these people out of their land that God's given them. And so God gives them instruction, and they're following that. And as it kind of goes through that, in verse 8, it picks up again from the point where Joshua dies, because Judges has started now, so it's describing this to us. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnah-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals, the foreign gods. Those that were in the land before they ever got there, those people were worshiping. So there arose a generation who didn't know the Lord. There arose a group of people. And yes, to some degree, I mean, we have to say, well, who does the blame fall on for that? I mean, if a generation arises that does not know God, who is responsible for that? Except for the people that should have taught them about God. The people who should have grounded them in who God was. But these people now were a people, but they were not a people of God. They didn't know God. And so they did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they took these foreign gods. Well, it's from that point on that you begin to see that God, I mean, he doesn't just leave them. Even as we mentioned last week, you know, they would have these periods of disobedience to God, and then disaster would come. And when the disaster would come, then God would do what? He would deliver them. And we see this over and over again through this book, and not just through this book. We see this with the people of God as a whole. But we see this pattern happening throughout the whole book of Judges and what it amounts to. I mean, we come into chapter 3 and we find that God is having to deliver the people of Israel. As they're living among all these other peoples, as we see even in verse 5 of chapter 3, it says they took their daughters in marriage and they gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. They just started completely mixing with the people that God had told them to drive out. That God had told them to completely destroy, actually. Verse 7, though, we find, I mean, it's an introduction to this first judge, if you will, Othniel. And we don't know a lot about it, but I just want you to hear this. It's one that we can read that's short, that won't take us a lot of time, but you can kind of see the pattern starting. Verse 7 of chapter 3 of Judges. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. This would be kind of like the male and female deities that were there. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. So here's 8 years that go by, that they are subject to this foreign king. And it says then in verse 9, but when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came on him so that he became Israel's judge and he went to war. The Lord gave Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. So here's the pattern as it starts. The people disobey God. They don't know who he is. Now they find out who he is. He delivers them. And we see this happening over and over again through this book. But what happens is God raises up a judge when they are finally to a point. I mean, they're completely being ruled by this foreign king. And God sends a deliverer, Othniel. And he delivers them 40 years. I mean, so here's Othniel. He's alive. And he's the deliverer. He's the one who saves them from this disaster that they're in for 40 years. But then, verse 12, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. So here's another foreign king. And here we go again. I mean, this is an amazing story. I don't know, how many remember this story that we're getting ready to read? Okay, I see a few hands going. I can't go on without at least telling you the story. And you want to read it to get all the details, because I'll miss some details. But here's this king, and he is ruling over them now. And the Israelites send this guy by the name of Ehud to go pay tribute to the king. I mean, they're evidently sending the tax money or the money to the king through him. So he's going to pay tribute to the king. And it says that he hides, and it says it's about a cubit long. And so he's made a sword that's about this long from here to the tip of your finger, around 18 inches. And he says that he hides it on his thigh. And so he's got it over here. Is that right, or is he left-handed? He's left-handed, so he's reaching over here. And so just turn that around. He goes, he talks to the king, and he pays the tribute, and he leaves. Now it says the king, and I'm not making this up, it says the king is very large. And he leaves, but he comes back and he says, I've got a secret. I've got something I need to tell you in private. And so the king has everybody leave. And they're in an upper chamber. And Ehud goes in. And when he pulls out the knife, he shoves it in. And I won't go into all those details, but the knife ends up covered up. I mean, he leaves it. He falls over dead, and he leaves. Well, the people that the king has ushered out, why they're kind of waiting, and they're thinking he's using the restroom. And so it's kind of embarrassing because it actually says that. It's kind of embarrassing. They wait so long, But when they do go in, they find him dead. Well, by that time, Ehud is gone. He delivers Israel. He goes and he says, okay, let's go get him. And they do. And they win. And God does this time and time again. And you'll see a generation of people. I mean, the time frames, like we look back here at Othniel, and you look at this, 80 years, if you look at the end of this story, in verse 30 of chapter 3, that day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. So, I mean, within our time frame, we're thinking within our lifetimes, I mean, people would have lived this whole time and been in peace, right? People would have lived this. They could have lived their whole lives if they would have been born just right in this area of this. They could have lived their whole life, and they would have lived in peace. So what's happening here? What is going on? What is the problem that the people continue to go back to this? Because God delivers them, and they get to live all of this time in peace until Ehud dies. And in chapter 4, verse 1, again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. And as you just start going through here, I mean, you see Deborah, the next judge. And you see the things, and it's really an interesting story because, I mean, Deborah is leading in this as she's kind of set up as a judge, and people come and see her, and Barak is going to, go out in battle, but he wants Deborah to come along, and she says, well, you're not going to get the glory if I go along, because God is going to deliver Sisera, which is the captain of the army, into a woman's hand. And guess what? It's not her. When you're first reading the story, you think, okay, Deborah's going to be the one to do it. No, Deborah didn't do it. Jael, a woman in a tent does it. I mean, fascinating stories through here. I mean, drives a tent stake through the guy's temple as he's hiding in her tent, and she's got him covered up. She's already given him some warm milk, and he's gone to sleep. He's been running. He's hiding, and she takes a tent peg and a hammer and nails him to the ground. These are wicked times. But it's deliverance that God brings through that, and Deborah reigns as judge. But as you go through here, I mean, and I'm shortening these stories up. Gideon, we've looked at, it's not been that long ago, we looked quite at, Gideon is just an amazing story. A guy who thinks, no, there's no way. I'm the least in my family. We're the least tribe. I mean, it's not me. I'm not a mighty warrior. After all, I was hiding, threshing wheat so they wouldn't find it. But he is, because he's the one that God selected for it. There's all kinds of lessons in this, but what keeps happening over and over again? You just start flipping through here, and when you see Gideon, then Abimelech, Jephthah, the story about that guy. You go through each one of these, and then, you come to Samson, and you see some of the things that happened with Samson and surrounding his life, and he's the one that God is using to deliver Israel. But he is. And when you see some of the mistakes he makes, some of the things that he does, you think, why in the world? But he's the one God uses. But over and over again, you just flip through all of these until we finally get to a story at the very end that we looked at last week, and it doesn't end well. Matter of fact, it ends with, in verse 25, in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. I mean, that doesn't sound very hopeful. I mean, among this, and it's a reason, I think, within the canon of Scriptures, we have Ruth next, because it was in the time of the Judges. You find this beautiful story of Ruth. I mean, a story of love between people. I mean, Ruth for Naomi, and even the outcome of this. And it's just amazing what God does with this. Even in that same time frame, through all of this going on, there's a young child born to a woman who thinks she can't have any children. But she's praying to God that she could. Eli, who's the high priest, is actually watching her, and her lips are moving, and she's talking, and they didn't have Bluetooth in those days, so you didn't think that's what was going on, you know. I remember the first time I saw somebody talking on a Bluetooth. Do you remember that? You thought, that guy's crazy. Well, he thought she was drunk. I mean, he thought, so much for that woman. No, she was praying. And so she shared it with him. I want a son. And if I can have a son, I will dedicate him to God. I'll give him to God. Guess what? He is born, and she weans him, and she delivers him up to Eli, and his name's Samuel. I mean, what a judge, if you will, but more a prophet. But within this same time frame, here is this child being born. I mean, with the people of God doing this, you know. I mean, it's just bouncing from highs to lows, highs to lows. And why? I mean, that was our question to start with, right? Why? How did it get this bad? How did it ever get to that point? Well, Samuel does become a mighty prophet. It's interesting. Eli was the man that he was basically raised under. Eli was the high priest. Eli's sons weren't any good. They weren't any good at all. The people knew it. And you wonder, I mean, how can a man like that, raise sons like that? But then you see Samuel, and you see the mighty leader for God that he is in delivering God's message to the people of God. And guess what? His sons are no good. I mean, that maybe that's our answer. That's not really exactly where I was going, because that answers maybe a little bit of it. But it seems like it happens over and over again that a generation of people grow up and they don't know God. Well, they don't follow him at least. I don't want to fail that way, do you? So maybe that's part of our answer here is that a generation of people continued to rise up and they didn't know God. But how does that happen? Why does that happen? In chapter 8 of 1 Samuel, let's begin in verse 1. First Samuel chapter 8. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn, Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba, but his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the leaders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." Now remember those words, because we're coming back to that, but I want you to hear what Samuel had to say. But we're coming back up here. Verse 10, Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone go back to your own town." And he gave them a king. First king of Israel, King Saul. But up here, God says, verse 7, when he told Samuel, he said, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, just like they've done since the time I brought them out of Egypt." They said they were going to follow God. They said they could follow God. They said they would be witnesses against themselves that they would follow God. What they ended up doing was following men. I mean, you look at the stories, and over again, they followed men. As long as those men were alive that God had sent to deliver them, everything was good. But when that man died, it all fell apart. They weren't following God. He wasn't their king. It was men. Whether you called him a judge or whether you called him a king, I mean, it was a leader. And they followed him. Maybe that's the reason the kids didn't learn who God was. They thought it was a man. They thought it was a man who could deliver them. They thought it was a man who could lead them, that would make them powerful against the other nations that were round about them. They thought it was the strength of Israel because they now had a good leader. It wasn't any of that. They were delivered because of God. How easy it is for us. If you guys want to come on up, you can. How easy it is for us to follow a man. To follow somebody that maybe even God places in a situation. But we rest our hope on that, or we rest our strength on that. Or we think that is our deliverance, or we think that is what makes us good, or that is how God is going to use us. Folks, we have some wonderful leaders here. We really do. Every time we have a board meeting together, I thank these guys for their service and how they serve.